Happy Friday, everyone. It's 9:02 a.m. Eastern Time on Friday, the 20th of October, 2017. Thanks for joining me again for another Trader Bite. Derivatives trading involves substantial risk of loss and is not suitable for all investors. Past performance is not necessarily indicative of future results. The market this morning is showing strength on the buy side. Allocation is to risk. So far, we are gapping up across indices. We're looking at a fairly strong overnight session to the upside. The leader today is the Russell trading at 1510, 1510.2, up about 7.3 points or half a percent. The laggard today is crude. Crude is trading at 51.15 this morning, followed by the U.S. Treasury bond, which is down about 0.77% or an entire handle in a bond, giving us higher yields on the 30-year there. That's how things are shaping up. The big news that's pushing us along is the tax plan, right? So the tax plan, the Senate voted to pass the fiscal budget for 2018. The Senate passed this fiscal 2018 budget resolution, which is seen as a step towards tax overhaul. The vote was 51 to 49. The measure was passed generally along party lines, but Republican Senator Paul voted against the measure because of his concerns about raising the deficit. And what you have on that, this is essentially the core of what is called the Trump rally. The U.S. government is set up in the political atmosphere set up such that we have a Congress that is really pushing for tax reform and tax the reduction of tax, uh, and a president that also is supporting it. And so what you have is a market that's pricing that in, has been pricing it in since the election a year ago. So that's where we are. This is the push this morning. Other than that, what we're looking at for today as far as releases, we're looking for existing home sales at 10 o'clock for September, looking for 5.3. This is a preliminary number. And then the Baker Hughes rig count at 1 o'clock. We have Fed Speaker Mester at 2 p.m., but expecting this to be a quiet Friday after the European close, unless there is, of course, there are news conferences or chatter about this tax uh, uh, tax resolution. Let's take a look at what we expected yesterday. Yesterday ran into a lot of trouble with technical trouble, so I only covered the Russell. Only had time to cover the Russell before the market opened, and so the expectation yesterday, the primary expectation yesterday, was for an open auction out of range that consolidates around the 2549 MC point of control, key area here, the largest volume area since we came up here earlier this month, and the expectations for the market to become responsive and for the market to eventually, for the big move to be to the upside, um, and the expectations for us to move back to the SOC, the scene of the crime, the scene of the news of the Spain issue, independence issue, and the conflict that is arising there. Potential, of course, a disaster would be the civil war in Spain, and that's what the market priced in. But of course, because it's driven on news and its political nature, we do expect the SOC. The secondary hypothesis is for the market to be responsive upwards towards the prior auction, and then to move down and push towards that overnight low to hit that stat, the high probability stat of the overnight low or high being closed, and then for us to come back up. The overall target for Hypo 2 is for it to close somewhere in the gap zone. Yesterday was an odd combination of both. Here's what actually took place yesterday. Let me open up the ES chart. There we go. This is the ES 15 minute. So what we did yesterday, no, again, oops, here's what things looked like. So the overnight low is 25.4250. Did not quite get there, and it turned around and it pushed actually the overnight high. Again, the overnight high 25.6075. It ended up pushing all the way up to the high of 25.6150, and completely responsive. So at the beginning, we did get that push down that we expected, consolidation push down and then responsive, and it ended up going back to the SOC of 2558. Um, I that's I didn't I you know, I'd rather not have that side of the equation play. I'd rather see this have a precipitous fall, not because I want to do harm to somebody's pension or retirement plan, but I'd like to see the market actually shake out and clean up so it has a foundation from which we can trade to eventually push back up. This morning, the ES is actually trading all-time highs. It's 25.68, currently pushing the 25.71.75 on the overnight high, right up against this double measured move from August to the beginning of September. So this double measured move is at 25.72. We hit 25.71.75. Here's what the overnight session looked like. Hang on, switch to 15 and scale, and there it is. Just completely sideways. And then in the evening, the news came out about the Senate passing the tax reform or the tax budget and agreeing to it. Again, a 51-49 vote is a very, very tight margin, but the market is responding on news here and it is holding tight above the mid and is holding at the point of control. We have a very high distribution, or the very big distribution on the high side. Volume is higher than usual, 238,000 on the overnight session. We had very high volume yesterday, 343,000. So this is all a good sign of opportunities to come for today. However, it is Friday into the weekend. It is both yesterday's move and today's were news driven, politically driven, and so the overall nature of that is that the market will compensate and then go sideways, and we expect that to happen by the European close today, which is at 11:30 Eastern time. So the overnight session, higher high, higher lows, higher value, higher point of control, new all-time territory, all-time high territory. So we have basically what we had on Wednesday. We just resumed what we had on Wednesday. Gap up, retest of the gap zone, and then potential for a push down. Here's what the Russell did. Russell has a lot of rotations. We see a lot of rotations for the Russell. Oops, hang on. No. This is not the Russell. This is my trigger chart. Here we go. Yeah, I felt that there weren't enough rotations, but for the Russell, by the way, I'm using the C pound one, which is the retracement on the Russell zigzags is 0.9 on my trigger chart or 1 minute chart, whichever one you use. And we see a lot of rotations that are going outside, above, and below the red line. See this red line here? This is the 90% rotation limit on the Russell on a 1 minute chart, going back 20 days. And you see it just sloshing through there, right? Pushing through those limits again and again and again. Some pretty good rotations in the Russell. Not always behaving the way we would like to see, not always creating a strong rotation, pullback, and then continuation. But most of the time it does. Here's a very rotation, pullback, continuation. Here's another rotation, pullback, continuation later in the session. And so overall, it's been pretty good. The Russell broke the IB high. It's an IB high only session, normal variation day type. We closed above the mid on that 93.6% statistic, and we pushed back into the range and closed into Wednesday's range. So continuation, with the point of control higher with the Russell. And so what we end up with is a blunt top here. This high is pretty weak, a lot of volume on the high, so we expect this to move up in the overnight session. The Russell's trading 1511 right now, 1511, and we're back into the prior day's point of control, Wednesday's point of control. So that's where we are this morning. Let's go back to the ES and provide our scenarios, our plan for the day. Here we go. So again, open auction out of range and into new all-time highs. We've seen this so often, and it's so boring. Just again and again and again, rinse and repeat type of thing. And then we're looking for a drop. Pay attention to the 50% of the gap zone as an initial point of support. We're looking for a reaction there. So we're looking for it to drop into the gap zone, find a base, look for a higher low, and an impulse up. That pushes the overnight high, gets into the measured move, and then just holds on a flag steady. Later in the session, I expect it to start to roll over and push down. That is scenario number one. Okay, so I expect the balance, the composite here to be rejected. Okay, and so here, let's shift this composite over. We're filling in that composite pretty good. Notice the composite has a pretty well traded high here. We're about to extend that out. But overall, I'm expecting us to retest, to test towards the gap zone, not fill it, and then get a bounce up to basically flush out the sellers, and then consolidate into later in the session with a return towards the middle of the range later on. So we're outside of the value area here, and so that's where things are taking place. The secondary hypothesis, open, initiative, push up, create a lower high failure, get down into the opening swing, start to examine towards the gap, and then hold steady sideways into the rest of the session. You're basically looking at almost exactly the same kind of action we saw on Wednesday. So pull up Wednesday's chart. That's what we're looking at for scenario number two. Okay, so that's where we are. I'm going to leave it there. I'm running out of time. It's 8:15. I won't cover the Russell. Actually, let's take a quick look at the Russell while we're at it. Why not, right? So the Russell, here's the overnight session. Looks very much the same. Very strong move in the Russell. 11 points. Pretty good movement in the Russell overnight. Of course, it's very, very thin. Again, the overnight inventory is long on volume and price. And we're looking at a product that is likely to follow the same kind of scenario. The Russell, however, is relatively weaker, as I've talked about all week. It is tending to put in lower highs, lower lows consistently. The small caps are definitely in a short-term downtrend, and it's not abating. So even though it's trading 1510, we're above the 1508 or 1509 point of control. So it's really important for the Russell, for the buyers in the Russell, to remain above this MC point of control. The expectation in the Russell is for an open auction, push the high, make a lower high, and then start to move towards this MC point of control, consolidate, and extend down. I expect range extension down on the IB and the Russell as the primary scenario. Why am I looking at scenario number 2 in the ES and applying it as scenario number 1 in the Russell, it's because of the overall context of the Russell. The Russell has been having a much easier time moving lower than higher. There are more traders the hitting the bid than there are lifting the offer. So if you look at the Russell's delta, which is right here, the yellow line is the zero delta. That means there are equally as many contracts being lifted as being hit. In other words, equally aggressive buyers as sellers at the zero line. And you'll notice uh, beyond, everything beyond the rally day way back here on the 2nd of October, you notice that we've spent pretty much all of our time in the Russell hitting the bid, basically selling on every move. We see the market selling. The Russell has consistently closed at zero or below, not above, for the last 3 weeks almost. This is important to note, okay? So the expectation is for the Russell to trade to the downside much more easily than the upside. That's hypo one, or scenario number 1. Scenario 2 is we do get responsive early on. We move towards the gap zone and then we hold steady at the point of control. The MC point of control, push that overnight high and then come back into the range. That is scenario 2. So what I'm looking for in scenario 2 is, do we start with the weakness, become responsive right away, which is expected in either case, but do we then find a base, move prices low enough that we can get buyers to step in? The Russell has not had very good buyers so far. And yesterday we did rally into the close, but in general we've come off into the close. We've just been holding. We've been holding away from the high into the close. That's the second scenario for the Russell. I'll leave you with that. Hopefully this helps guide your own planning and execution. Remember, this is not theory. This is not a class in theory and market movement. This is about creating a game plan for the day and then waiting for the market to show us where the weakness is or the strength is, and then trade from strength. Remember that. Trade from strength. Trade with the bigger movement. Good luck, and I'll catch you on Monday morning. Take care.